I'm thrilled with the turnout. This is really wonderful. I'm Mary Reed. I'm the president of the Clarksville Community Development Corporation, or CCDC, and on behalf of our board, I welcome you to the first in a series of community conversations our organization is hosting. Each conversation will focus on a different important topic that affects Clarksville and other Central Austin neighborhoods, and provide an opportunity for attendees to hear from experts, ask questions, dialogue with one another, and learn. Tonight's community conversation focuses on CodeNEXT, the new proposed land use code for Austin. If adopted, it is expected to bring profound changes to our city's oldest neighborhoods. To help us understand CodeNEXT and those changes, we are lucky to have as speakers tonight 3 experts on the subjects. They are, to my far right, Laura Morrison. Laura served 2 terms as an at-large Austin City Council member from 2008 to 2015, where she championed quality of life issues and promoted community values. Her efforts focused on neighborhood stability and affordable housing, public health, social services, and the environment. Laura now serves the community in several capacities, including as a member of the board of directors of the Ending Community Homelessness Coalition, ECHO, a collaborative bringing coordination and funding to address homelessness in the Austin area, and Housing Works, an organization that serves as a resource for affordable housing solutions. Karen McGraw, in the middle, is the owner of Karen McGraw Architect. Her work focuses on the preservation, restoration, and rehabilitation of residential, commercial, and civic buildings, as well as on planning efforts to maintain unique urban neighborhoods. Karen is currently a member of Austin's Planning Commission and served on the city's Residential Design and Compatibility Task Force. In addition, she led the establishment of 3 neighborhood conservation combining districts in Central Austin, as well as the South Congress Avenue Preservation Plan. Mary Sanger, to my left, holds a master's in social work with a special emphasis in community organizing from UT. She has worked with neighborhoods threatened by various manifestations of development and urban renewal since the early 70s, when she was employed by Travis County Legal Services to organize neighborhoods in East Austin. She ran the successful Democratic campaigns of Jim Hightower for State Agriculture Commissioner and Ann Richards for State Treasurer. She also spent 10 years at the Environmental Defense Fund, working on land use and water issues, and has served on the boards of several nonprofit organizations, including the Texas Low-Income Housing Information Services. She currently serves as secretary for the Hancock Neighborhood Association and is one of the founding members of CommunityNotCommodity.com. Before I turn things over to the speakers, I want to give a big thanks to St. Luke's United Methodist Church for letting us use this beautiful space tonight. And I want to explain how the evening is going to work. Each of our speakers will talk for 10 minutes, and then they will dig deeper into CodeNEXT via an informal conversation among themselves that will last another 30 minutes. After that, they will take questions. If you want to ask a question, please come up here to the lectern and use the mic as I'm using it. And please keep your questions short, because we have a limited amount of time, and please avoid pontificating. Also, please identify yourself and your neighborhood. And finally, if there's anyone in the in the audience who out there would prefer not to come up to the lectern, raise your hand once the time for questioning begins, and someone with the CCDC will bring a notebook to you with a pen. You can write your question in the notebook together with your name and neighborhood, and then towards the end of the questioning period, I'll read the questions aloud. One other thing, the second community conversation in our series will be about preserving neighborhood character, adding diversity, and managing density. And the third will explore using local historic districts as tools for neighborhood preservation. We don't have a firm date and location for either event yet, but as soon as we nail down that information, we'll be posting it on the CCDC's website, and the URL for that is www.clarksvillecdc.org. Also, there's a sheet at the back, if any of you haven't completed it, where you can sign up to get news from the CCDC about CodeNEXT and other neighborhood events. So that said, I'm turning it over to Laura Morrison.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you all for coming. It's really great to see such an amazing turnout on this hot night. So I was on the council when this whole effort got kicked off, and I thought that how great, I'm not going to be on the council to have to deal with it, but once CodeNEXT came out, I just couldn't stand to be in a city and not know what the code said. So I found myself getting a little bit involved and delving into what was going on with the code proposal. So I thought I would spend my time giving you a little bit of background about how this effort got started and what the thrust of the effort was, because frankly, the upshot of what I'm going to say is I'm afraid it got off track. So to back up just to the very beginning, we're here to talk about CodeNEXT, which is a proposed new land development code. And land development code, a lot of you know what that is, some of you might not know what that is, but it's about zoning. It's about what you can build where, how high your buildings can be, what you can use them for, but it also deals with water quality issues, transportation, signage, parkland, and things like that. So it's a big deal. And so just to back up to the actual what kicked all of this off, we need to back up one step before CodeNEXT, and that is to our comprehensive plan, which is called Imagine Austin. Now, by charter, we have to have a comprehensive plan, and for many years, we pretty much didn't. And so the city spent quite a bit of effort saying, what is our vision for the future of this city? How do we want to evolve? How do we want to grow? And that's what goes into a comprehensive plan. And that resulted in what's called Imagine Austin, which is our comprehensive plan. It lays out it's not just about the land development code, it lays out like big picture priorities about, it's a little bit like apple pie and mom, but it says, Austin, our vision for the next 30 years is to be livable and sustainable and respect all of our people and all of that. It provides lots and lots of policies, suggestions, and programs of how to achieve those things. One of the things that's discussed in Imagine Austin that's very important to CodeNEXT is it lays out how are we going to grow, where is the new population going to be located that's moving to Austin as we grow, and how are we going to densify? And it makes quite clear some very important elements of how we should densify. And that is, number one, there's something called a growth concept map. And it says we're going to have activity nodes around the city, and those are going to be dense areas, and like the Domain. There'll be some more of those where you can work and live and play and buy your groceries. And we'll densify along the corridors. And let me say also one very important thing about what Imagine Austin says about densifying is the neighborhood plans are incorporated as part of Imagine Austin, which to me says that the density planning in neighborhood plans is part of our goal for how we densify in this town. So Imagine Austin listed 8 priority programs that were critical to get going to actually move toward that evolution and that growth pattern that we want. And one of the priority programs was to rewrite the Land Development Code, which had not been completely overhauled since the 80s. So it was getting a little tattered. It was getting lots and lots of modifications, and so there was a lot of concern about it being difficult. But on the other hand, there was a lot of bloodshed compromising to make those changes. Karen and I were both on the McMansion task force for that. But Imagine Austin says that we need to rewrite the Land Development Code to be compact and connected, but also to adopt green infrastructure to make a healthy Austin, have affordability throughout. And so that was what CodeNEXT was supposed to do.
There were lots of people real concerned about what was going to happen because so many people had shed so much blood over getting things right, or maybe losing some battles or winning some battles in the Land Development Code. So we were very careful in Imagine Austin to dictate some guidelines, and I'm going to read you some of them because I think they're really important as we talk here. The new code was supposed to reflect carefully crafted compromises like McMansion or like compatibility standards that say you can't build a tall building right next to a single-family house. It said some of the top priorities were continued protection, and this is a quote, continued protection and preservation of existing neighborhoods and the natural environment. And then also that the new code needed to be measured against consistency with adopted neighborhood plans, which it's not, which we'll be talking about. It needs to be measured against its impact on affordability and the ability of existing families to continue to reside in their homes. And the reason I pulled those quotes out is because as you hear discussion around the city and the neighborhood, and possibly tonight, one of the main issues is that with what is in effect some massive upzonings across our neighborhoods, that there will be significant displacement, that we will be losing the ability to stay in our homes, that the neighborhoods will be completely rebuilt. So anyways, in 2013, Opticos was selected as the consultant. They spent time doing the code diagnosis, studying neighborhood character. They did a sound check and showed what they were thinking in November of 15, and then 14 months later, they presented their idea of what their proposal of the new code, and it was this high, 1,100 pages. So it's been a lot of work for people to be able to delve into it. And I have to say, I was mentioning this to someone else, that they managed to do something I have never seen accomplished before in the city of Austin, and that is to find consensus and uniform dislike of the same thing. People disliked it for different reasons. Some people thought it didn't go far enough. Some people thought it went too far. But uniformly, people disliked the structure because it was very complicated, and they're trying to redo that. So from my perspective, they got off track. And the question is why? Because we not only put those guidelines in place that they should follow the neighborhood plans and all those other nice things, we were very specific that they should, if there are divisive issues, which we know there are, that they needed to come out and talk about alternatives, not just pick one thing. And that was not only mentioned when they were awarded the contract explicitly, we gave them more money to do that in 2014. There was also concern about how radical some of the changes in the zoning would be. And so they were directed and said they would sort of do a pilot program with an interested neighborhood about, well, let's try it out. How is this working? And that didn't get done. And then, as I mentioned, the zoning that they put in their proposal is not consistent with the neighborhood plans in many, many cases. And so, and it does not comport with the growth concept map. They did not put necessarily dense zoning, for instance, in the activity nodes that I talked about. And the question is why? And I heard them say, with regard to the neighborhood plans, they said, well, we had too many priorities, we couldn't achieve all of them, so we dropped that one. And then with regard to neighborhood plans and also the activity node issue, they have said that they were adding density and increasing density in areas where the market was asking for it, not where we had envisioned it, which is really unfortunate because, in fact, I heard them use the term economically inefficient use of land. And you know, these are our homes, and these are our communities, and families live there. And so unfortunately, the approach got pushed off toward more of a market-based approach as opposed to using zoning as a tool to mold your vision of the city. So I'm going to stop there because I think I'm about out of time, and we will have more time to talk.
Well, that was a great introduction by Laura, and so I don't have to tell you all that stuff. And so I managed to kind of stay out of this deal for part of the time, because when Opticos got this contract, they were doing some input things and papers, but they didn't really tell anybody what they were doing for 4 years. And as an architect, I can tell you, if you ask me to add on to your house, and I call you one day and say, okay, your plans are all done, you're gonna say, what? So that's not a good process. And so it took them 4 years working somewhere to come up with what they came up with. And I've been on the Planning Commission. Kathy Tovo appointed me almost a year and a half ago. So I've only been dealing with this really since January. January 30th, they delivered the 1,100-page books, and all of us on the Planning Commission were fortunate enough to get one, see if we could carry it home. And then that was the text. And on April 18th, they came out with the maps. So to me, that was just too much. We've redone your city, here it is. And it's been very difficult to digest because, as Laura said, it has all these different elements that we're trying to deal with. Like we were trying to talk about subdivision last night. That is a huge topic in and of itself. How we will ever give input in the next month on subdivision, I don't know. So the maps, I don't know if any of you gotten online and looked at your mapping of some of you have, good. So the city took input on the text and the maps, and right now they're rewriting the text, and they're correcting the maps. But so, and I might have to walk around here because I need to. So if you came up and looked at the map, this big pink thing is downtown, and your neighborhood being west of downtown. If you looked at this, you saw that they have several different titles up here. They have T3 in, they have T4 in, they have some zoning that looks like what's there now, like GRVCO. So it's pretty confusing, but basically what they've done is they've gone from what they call Euclidean zoning, which means we're all worried about the land use. You know, we want to know it's going to be a house, or it's going to be a commercial, or it's going to be multifamily. But their theory is the shape of the building is much more important than what's in it, which is called form-based zoning. So it's a completely different system, and I'm not going to even try to explain it. I have a few illustrations if you want to look at them, but it's hard to explain. But their idea is if you worry about how big and how the building is, it'll all be compatible. But the bottom line is that every single-family lot in the city is going to get an entitlement of at least one more dwelling unit. So if you have a house and there's a duplex next door, that duplex will be entitled to have another unit. And so that's sort of, no matter what the letters are on the map, that's sort of the idea. In T3, which they call the transect districts, and don't get too attached to that, that name's going away now. In those districts, under some circumstances, you can go up to 6 units on a lot, on a large lot. So that's one of the things that is rather dramatic. The other things that might give you a little heartburn, the form-based thing, and I know you can't see this, form-based is this little picture that shows a whole bunch of little boxes on a site, and that tells you your building can be this big, located exactly here on the site. When you put that on top of a built city, everything's non-conforming. If you want to add on to your house, we have no idea if you need a variance. We don't know, but we think that incentivizes more demolition. compatibility standards and McMansion are theoretically baked into this code. Not quite. So we're working on trying to get the essence of those things back. Parking is being reduced. Parking requirements go from two cars per dwelling unit to 1. So if your streets are congested, it's going to get worse. Another thing I want to mention is that Susan Moffett, who's a Hyde Park neighbor, was on the Citizen Advisory Group. They wrote a huge report that came out last night that's really, really comprehensive and has a lot of the criticism of this code in it. But she delved into schools. And so she's a AISD rep to the CAG. And she talks about how if we densify around the schools, we're going to lose family housing because most of the new development is small, one-bedroom units. So she has talked about how we need to preserve the zoning around the schools and how we should not reduce the parking requirements because around the schools, we don't want the streets completely clogged because the schools don't have parking. So you can go to the CAG report and find her work, and you can find it on the CodeNEXT website. The city has a CodeNEXT website, and if you look through that, there are position papers from different groups. You'll find one that says Susan Moffett. You'll find one with my name on it. You'll find one from the home builders, the realtors, a lot of different groups. You could read that for a long time, but that's a resource you might want to look into. So I think I'm out of time. Am I out of time? I'm a little bit more. So I think what's really important is to understand that I don't know how much demolition you're having here. I know the east side is having dramatic demolition, and that's under today's code. So you can imagine when you give everybody new entitlements, you're going to exaggerate that demolition. So that's a huge concern. There was an article in the paper a week or so ago that the black population of Austin is being reduced and the black population of Manor is being increased because people are kind of being pushed out. So that gentrification and displacement is a really serious problem because what the CodeNEXT team did, they put all the densification into this District 9 neighborhoods. Bolden, Heritage, your neighborhood, Hancock, all the East Austin neighborhoods, all these neighborhoods are where they put the density instead of, like Laura told you, on the corridors, in the activity centers, and dealing with the sprawl. Planning Commission is forced to approve miles and miles of single-family houses without any services out, in the suburbs. So we think they've made a huge mistake. They've been asked to correct it. They're rewriting the code, and that will come out in, the text will come back the end of August, I believe, in another version. The mapping is going to change, just so you'll know. That little piece of paper up there shows you all these funny names. The Planning Commission said this is a mess. Nobody can understand all these names. So they've got a new scheme that says if it's R1, it means one house on a lot. If it's R2, it means 2 units on a lot. Who could figure that out? They thought SF3 was awfully strange since it allows 2 units. So they are collapsing all of these different kinds of zoning, whether it's T3 or LMDR, into one system, all called R for residential. So we don't quite know how that's going to work out, but that's what they're working on. So when you see the next revision, it'll all be different.
I'm going to be repeating some things you've heard, but first let me tell you that Mary Reed, when she introduced me, she mentioned that I'm a member of a group called Community Not Commodity, and you can understand why we chose that name. It is a project of a larger nonprofit organization called Save Our City Austin. And when the CodeNEXT process started 3-4 years ago, most of the associates of the community, not commodity, stayed involved in participating in every aspect of the development of the code. Not that we understood it all, but we participated. So when the text came out, as Karen talked about, when the text came out, we gathered together about 25 of what we consider some of the brightest people in the city, including Karen, and architects, engineers, lawyers, planners, neighborhood advocates, and we said, let's crowdsource this 1,100-page code. And so we digged into it, and as a result, we provided a lot of short papers, readable papers that tell you what's what means this, what means that. We started distributing it very widely, and a whole bunch of neighborhoods use that information for their own work in their own neighborhoods to raise awareness of what the code was all about. So I want to talk a little. I want to talk a little here about what the response has been at the neighborhood level, and I think I need to change this. That's good. Okay, good. So what Karen talked about in terms of transect neighborhoods, that covers approximately 30 neighborhoods in Austin. And there, if you can see this map, or you can come up later, it's not just District 9, but it covers other districts as well. But District 9 is primarily the one that has been hit with transect zones. So these are the neighborhoods that Community Not Commodity has been working with. And these are the neighborhoods that have raised their voice in a very, I think, to this point, very effective way. They have done almost every different kind of thing. Crestview did a cocktails in the code parties to get their neighbors information about the code. Pemberton, with Ben Faubers and his wife Laura's great leadership, have designed their own yard signs called, I think you all did that, and one of your neighbors, that you might see around, called No CodeNEXT. One neighborhood did these postcards that you'll see at the front of the desk, and that they've asked to send out, asking the mayor to keep his promise about not increasing density in our neighborhoods. The Crestview Brentwood neighborhood gathered together by walking their streets about 400 people to come and listen to the mayor and also to testify and to complain against their new zoning. So those are just a few of the things that have been going on. Every neighborhood that has been transect, as far as I know now, has either done a resolution, had meetings with the mayor, had meetings with their city council, participated in a variety of ways. And so I just want to say you all have allies out there. Let me just give you a few facts about the neighborhoods. Do I have time? Okay. Only 5 minutes? Okay. Of the approximately 33 neighborhoods which have been targeted for transect zones, 26 out of them could or should be considered historical or historic. They have buildings and sites that are over 50 years old. They reflect elements of Austin's cultural, social, architectural, economic, political history. They're not all considered historic, but they could be. This is not to say that they haven't changed over time, because every one of them has. And those changes have come about because they went through, except with the exception of two, have gone through a neighborhood planning process, which Austin adopted that process, I think, 30 years ago. And most of these neighborhoods have gone through it. Now, some people think that that planning process was all about keeping people out or putting barriers against other people coming in. But in fact, the neighborhood planning process was an infill process. In other words, it was to help neighborhoods incorporate additional density and additional tools to provide affordable housing or a mix of housing. And they have all accepted it. But I want to give an example of one neighborhood who's accepted every what we call infill tools that were out there at the time. And that is the Chestnut neighborhood, which is in a black neighborhood, a historic black neighborhood near central East Austin. They accepted all the tools. They accepted accessory dwelling units, cottage courts, small lot amnesty, everything that they were asked to accept. They accepted it because they thought it would bring about affordable housing. But in fact, it has not. Today, they have seen over 120 demolitions since 2000, 120 demolitions. They have seen their neighbors displaced. They have seen gentrification. They have seen the very opposite of affordable housing. They have seen $400,000 homes and now up to $1 million homes. So now comes the city, and it tells all these neighborhoods that have said, yes, we'll accept density, we'll accept all these tools because you said it would provide affordable housing, it would accommodate new people, we want to serve our community as well. So they accepted them, and now I think they feel totally betrayed. I think they feel betrayed on a personal level because they see that their financial investment in their neighborhood might be destroyed. They see that the stability of their neighborhood might be destroyed, even though they had made every effort to accommodate to the changes that were happening in our city. So I think we have a fight on our hands. I'm getting more optimistic because I think of all the voices that have been heard, that the mayor and the council are hearing us, but I think it demands a whole lot more. I don't know what that is, but I think we're going to discuss it in a minute, what the larger activities and strategy could be. And I'll end there.
I'm going to go ahead and take off on what Mary said, talking about the pressure on property values and what happens when you upzone. Because, you know, the bottom line is that affordability is a huge issue across this town, whether it's traditionally lower income neighborhoods or middle income, or, you know, property values here are going sky high. And if it's your home, that's not so cool. If it's your home, you just want to stay there, and and the value of it is not in the money. But when you can build more units, or you can build more square footage, which is what's in the current CodeNEXT, there's going to be pressure, market pressure on that property. And as I mentioned, when they were picking out where they were going to place the increase, the higher density, like the T4s and T3s and things like that, they actually targeted where there was already pressure. So it's like throwing gasoline on the fire. Now, there's always a discussion about how density and increased supply can decrease the cost of housing. I haven't seen that happen yet anywhere in the country. And so that's the unfortunate thing, because not only do you end up having things like you have a $600,000 house that gets, well, great, you can build two $450,000 condos. That's not really going to help the issue. Not only that, but it's going to potentially displace somebody that was already able to live and maybe wouldn't be able to buy that house in the first place. So I wanted to mention that. And there was an analysis that was done, that the consultants done with a tool called Envision Tomorrow, where they took the CodeNEXT zoning and projected into the future 10 years what would happen to the city. And they projected 139,000 new housing units could be built. And, you know, people say that's how many we need for the population that's coming here. Their first version of it also said that in the next 10 years, 144,000 people would be displaced from their homes. Needless to say, there was a bit of an outcry about that, and they said, oh wait, we made a mistake, that was a wrong label, let us go back and work on it, and their second version came and they had just taken that number out. So I don't really, the transparency is not great there. But what I do want to also talk about is another part of the code that they dropped in June for the first time, their density bonus program. We don't have very many tools in this town that we can legally use to actually get some lower income housing built. So put aside the preservation of affordable housing issue, which is going to be exacerbated. But the density bonus program, we have lots of them around town. You might have heard of vertical mixed use, VMU. We've got some of that, you know, on Lamar and 6th Street. And basically it says, we'll let you build more than you're actually allowed to build right now, as long as you promise to provide some affordable housing. And so they have proposed sort of making it uniform across the city, because there's, I think, 15 different density bonus programs. And I have some good things to say about what they proposed. Number one, it requires that if you're going to be part of this bonus program where you're going to build more but provide affordable housing, you must ignore a source of income for when you're looking at tenants, which means Section 8 housing vouchers can't be denied, and that's a problem that we have around town. So that's a good thing. They have changed the sort of the standard from what's called an 80% MFI income level to 60%. So they're saying if you're going to build affordable housing, it has to be actually a little more affordable than we were talking about. It also broadens geographically where that affordable housing could be. And then the third thing, and I think this is a good thing, although I guess there's some controversy over this, and that is that you have to build your affordable units with the same number of bedrooms proportionately as the rest of your development. So if you're building, so you can't just make all the affordable units small efficiencies. So that's a good thing. The problem is that number one, with their proposed rezoning, they're already giving away a whole lot of increase in entitlement. Like right now, for the properties along Lamar where we have VMU, you have a limit of how many square feet and how many units you can do. And if you want to do more than that, then you have to do affordable housing, and people are doing it. What they do in this code is they already say, okay, forget about number of units, forget about square footage, and you can have all that, and then the bonus density is like height and things like that. So it's like they've given away some of the leverage that we already have with the increased zoning, if in fact it's the right place. And then the third thing, and this is something that I think a lot of people responded with comments to, and that was that there's also a possibility that instead of actually building your affordable units in your project, you could pay a fee to the city, who would then take that money and build the affordable units somewhere else. I'm a fan of not allowing that, because that's a way to get units all around town. Other people think that, maybe it would make sense. Another reason one of the main reasons I'm against it is because I have never seen a fee in lieu that a developer doesn't like. which means it's always cheaper to pay the fee in lieu than to do the on-site affordable, which means the fee in lieu is too low. So I don't know that we've ever been able to set that. Anyways, that's going to be reworked based on some of the comments. That data that tells us whether the number of units that are affordable that are being required based on increase in height and things like that, whether that's a fair trade. That data is not available right now, and they're going to be making that all available so we can see and, you know, actually look at it, and people can evaluate whether they think that it's a fair community benefit for the increased entitlement that they're getting. So there's a lot going on.
I just wanted to point out while we're talking about affordable housing, and Laura can help me because I know she's read this article as well. What some say is the most affordable housing is the housing that's on the ground. And what the National Historic Trust has just recently, and please help me on this, good, you can quote it, has recently shown is that Austin's old, as I pointed out, old neighborhoods are the ones that provide the most affordable housing. It is not new housing, which under CodeNEXT we would get, but it is the old housing, the old apartments, and they give great credit to the preservation of these neighborhoods because of that.
And I just want to add one thing. The council has been having a lot of work sessions to discuss this, thanks to Kathy Tovo brought up the idea that, hey, the council should really be talking, and so they scheduled a lot of work sessions. And one of the things she said when the consultants were saying, look, you already have so many demolitions going on, especially in her district, you know, so it's already happening. And her comment was, we were looking to CodeNEXT to actually help us with that as opposed to exacerbate it.
Absolutely.
Well, that's a good note, and I think one of the things that I've said, and sometimes I'm the Lone Ranger on the Planning Commission with some of these comments, but is that Opticos, the consultant, has brought us all these tools to densify. You know, let's make it more and more dense everywhere. But they haven't brought us any tools to preserve anything or stabilize anything. And not only that, is that Austin only has 4 historic districts because they have to be done by the neighborhoods. The city has no program, no staff, no funding. The Neighborhood Conservation Combining District, which is a conservation district, it doesn't stop demolition, but we created 3 of those in central Austin. They're throwing that tool away because the staff doesn't like it. So I've been asking for these tools, but we're not getting much response. The only thing we are getting is some willingness to kind of back off the form-based. I queried architects all over the country who do you have form-based zoning? How is it working? And they all said, not too well. They said, when we have a project with an existing building, we have to do more work, it costs more money, we might need a variance. And so, you know, this is kind of a thing that people have been trying to do around the country, but it's very, very hard on built areas. In Austin, like I say, you have to do your own historic district. But many neighborhoods have done some of the work. I think your neighborhood has some of the work. You have National Register. Bolden, which is a really targeted neighborhood, they've done a survey prior to doing a historic district. The city did a survey of all of East Austin. You usually do that survey as a preparation to identify historic districts, but the city's not doing anything with it. They only have 2 people in that office. They're doing nothing. Hancock has done some survey work. So all of these neighborhoods have done some preparation toward historic districts, but there's no help. And that is one thing that would really calm some of this frenzy, because we have lots of places to put density. There are lots of other places. We don't need to sacrifice our neighborhoods. So I'm kind of encouraging neighborhoods to, if you've got some preparation on a historic district, some neighborhoods are saying they're going to go file. They're going to get them filed ahead of this code. You know, take stock of what you've done and what you might want to do, because the only tool that stops demolition in the city is historic district. And it might be that part of your neighborhood could do that, maybe not all of it, but it is a tool. And it hasn't been offered, but I have been talking to the mayor and talking to other people, and hopefully I'm not a lone voice, but we don't have those tools. We may have other tools. One tool that was mentioned is in Austin, if you tear down a building that's more than 5,000 square feet, you have to recycle all the materials, but that doesn't count for houses. So that might be a little bit of a deterrent to demolition. You know, anything we could get might be helpful. So I think the only other thing I had on my list, and when you go to that city website, one of the papers is Preservation Austin's paper about historic preservation. That's a really great one to read. The staff is off rewriting the code. They really haven't had any guidance. They've taken input from everybody and groups and everything. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know if they're going to revise the code and say, oh, this group wants a historic district, but this group wants, 8 units on every lot. How are they going to pick? We don't know what the consultant and the staff are going to recommend. So it's kind of a big mystery right now as to what we get in this next rewrite. So I would say, stay tuned on all of that. I think we'll get some improvement, but I don't know if we'll get where we want to go. After that comes out in August, there's going to be another draft in the fall, and that will be the draft where Planning Commission will have hearings. So we will be having hearings in November and December, and our input, our recommendation to council is due in January. Then council will have hearings, and they want it adopted in April, and they're sticking with that date. I think it could change, but they're trying to stick with that date.
I had one other topic to touch base on just quickly, and I have a reference for you. The League of Women Voters, I worked with them on this, submitted recommendations on process and procedures, and their reaction to how the code, because the code has all the rules about hearings and all of that, how their recommendations on how it should change. The bottom line is that there are some problems. In some places, the public participation opportunities for public participation are weakened and diminished. And I'm not going to go into gory detail because it's really gritty and boring, but just to give you an overview, in some places they've removed the requirement for public notice of a hearing at all, so people won't, there'll be a hearing but nobody will know about it. I guess that's like a tree in the forest. They have changed the code so that even if there's an error in notice to the community, they can still go ahead with a public hearing, or they can change the location at the last minute of a public hearing. So it's just some of those sort of problematic things. And then the other set of issues there is that the staff in the code, in the proposal, has been given significantly more discretion. So one example, my favorite example, is if there's an inadvertent construction error in height, or I think the other thing is height, setback, or building coverage. If there's an inadvertent error, the staff is allowed to approve up to a 10% increase. So if you're building a 100-foot building and oops, you make it 110, the staff can okay that. And then they have the ability to approve non-conforming buildings. They have ability to approve a change from one non-conforming use to another. These are all things that right now there's transparency and the ability for the public to weigh in on. And another one of my favorites is if they find that the code is incomplete in some way, then the director gets to fill in the blanks. So I would recommend, if you're interested in that kind of thing, there's a lot more gory detail on the League of Women Voters. If you just go to the League of Women Voters Austin website, and they have a search box there for you, and search for CodeNEXT, one word, recommendations, and you'll be able to read all of that. So hopefully, and they submitted that as a recommendation, so hopefully they will be responding to some of that.
Just to follow up about some of those procedural things, the Board of Adjustment has done a review of this code, and they've written a report, and that's on the CodeNEXT website. When the council did a recent resolution, they have asked for input from the Environmental Board and the Landmark Commission, and those reports were not posted yet. They may still be deliberating. I know Landmark Commission will be. So you might, if you're interested in that, you might check up on their schedule and give input to that process and get involved with them. Because as a planning commissioner, we have 1,100 pages and a map to deal with. So we can't possibly do that. You know, we can't possibly know all of that. And we really need people's help. So we need those boards and commissions to tell us what they think, and we need citizens to get involved and help too. So I hope you will all stay involved because it's terrifically fun. And I don't know what else to say.
I know we just have a few minutes, but I'd like to go back to some fundamentals, and because it's what the neighborhoods have asked, and that is, why us? And there doesn't seem to be a good reason, except for one. And there's not a good reason because we are dense, we have affordable housing, we have a mix of housing types, we have allowed multifamily apartments, et cetera, et cetera. So why us? And Laura alluded to this, but I hope you all will keep it in mind because it seems to be extraordinary that we would use our zoning policy in this way. And that is because they want to redevelop our neighborhoods. And we have found that in writing. It is not sort of something that we've made up. This is not a fake news. They actually have written it down, market desirability. So I think that it's something that we as citizens really should think about. Should we allow the city to take our neighborhoods and use them for the purpose of redevelopment? Now, I come from a background of fighting urban renewal, so I don't like this at all, and I think it's worth fighting for, or against.
What else? Questions?
Thanks, all of you, for your wonderful comments, and was found it very, very interesting. Now, we're going to open the floor up to questions, and if you have a question, again, go up there to the lectern and use the mic. And once again, keep your question as short as possible, no pontificating, identify your neighborhood, and if you want to say your name, that's fine too. Thank you. One other thing. If you don't want to come up to the lectern, then Brooke, the woman in the middle here with the black dress on, she's got a notebook. Raise your hand. She'll come by. You can write your name and a neighborhood and your question in the notebook, and then I'll read the questions aloud. Pardon me? Yeah, although it doesn't go out as far. There's somebody out there that wants to.
I'm Mary Ann Dorman with Old Enfield Neighborhood Association, and my question is, how does this interface with impervious cover requirements?
I can answer that, I think. In a lot of the areas, impervious cover is not changing. I think the consultants and staff are aware that Austin floods, and so all of these residential districts are pretty much 45% impervious cover. Actually, the Watershed Department has done some studies, and one of the studies says if everything was redeveloped by CodeNEXT, we would have less impervious cover. I think that's a real stretch. And the place that would come from is if you have an existing commercial development in the central city and you have, say, 90% impervious cover, you can sort of keep that. But what they're saying is you're going to have to go to the new rules. So they're really trying to get rid of some impervious cover. But the fact of that actually happening, not very widespread.
Does that mean that they're just going to take it in height? In other words, the development, if you can't, the height requirement is not going to change your impervious cover, right? I mean,
Some of the height requirements change, and they change relative to compatibility. You know, where we have compatibility standards, if you're familiar with those, what is it, like a 100-foot building is going to be 300 feet from your house now. It's going to be 50 feet from your house in CodeNEXT. That's a big complaint that we have.
Thank you.
I want to add something too. But there is another issue. Even though the impervious cover limits are not changing, one of the concerns that people need to be aware of is that there's a lot of property in the neighborhoods and residential that are nowhere near their maximum. And if you're promoting redevelopment, displacement, demolition, there's a good chance, especially as the prices go up, that they're going to be maxing out. So you'll get a neighborhood that's maxed out where it now isn't, so that flooding can become more of a problem. Is that what you were going to say, Mary? Yeah.
Ditto.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is April Collins, and this is my neighborhood. Not a public speaker, so this is a big crowd, but my husband and I are really enjoying.
Can you speak into the microphone?
My husband and I are really enjoying and have worked hard to raise our family in this neighborhood, and so with young children, I'm wondering, aside from parking, what do you, as the expert, see as the effect on our school, especially a school as desirable as Matthews is here?
Welcome to the neighborhood.
Yeah. Okay, I'll try this one. Well, for one thing, a lot of the new development, if somebody can redevelop, what they're building is one-bedroom apartments, because the people coming to Austin, by and large, are singles. And so we're losing family housing to one-bedroom condos. So that's one big concern, because every time we see a density bonus project at the Planning Commission, it's all one bedroom. We have to beg and plead to get any kind of 2- or 3-bedroom housing. So that's one issue. And I think also, because we need to keep the population of the schools going. And last night, the CAG gave their final report, which I have here, but it will be online in a few days. What they said, they had just gotten some information from AISD that on the corridors where they're building the big new apartment buildings, North Lamar, Burnett, South Lamar, they studied 6,895 new dwelling units, and AISD identified 46 students in the 6,895 dwelling units. So that new density is not bringing us students. And so when we lose family housing, we're not getting family housing back. The other thing is just the environment around the schools, to keep from putting a lot of entitlements with little parking around the schools. That just damages the schools.
So to clarify for me, if there are no new students, does that mean that our schools are losing funding?
Our schools are losing population, and they were going to close a school near Hyde Park. It's been saved again, but it's very difficult. They're having to close schools because of funding, and also AISD's losing students because, like my son, my 31-year-old son just moved 20 miles away to Cedar Park, where he could buy a nice house close to a school with a sidewalk and a park, and, you know, for like $150,000 less than he'd pay in Austin.
Right.
So that's part of our dilemma.
And then as a part B, after everyone else has asked their questions, could you give us a few things that we in this neighborhood could do to right what you think are the wrongs of CodeNEXT and maybe make it better for us?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you.
I was going to ask the same question, so could you answer that?
Well, I think you should write letters to the mayor even though the council will not take up hearings until next year, they're well aware of this. And our council member, Kathy Tovo, is going to do everything she can for our neighborhoods, and we know that. But there are 11 people on the city council. And so if you know other council members, or even if you don't, it's important to start letting them know how you feel. Don't just count on Kathy to save us. She's going to do what she can, but be sure and try to, if you find, like some of these council members who represent the suburbs have no idea about a historic neighborhood. They just think it's old, you know? And I would encourage you to offer to give them a tour or try to get them more familiar and see, because it's about counting votes. It's going to come down to counting votes. I don't know how much improvement we'll get in the code before we get to that point, but ultimately it's counting votes.
I think it's time to start talking maybe about the strategy. Now, I'm on...
One more question. My name is Misty White, and this is my neighborhood. And my concern is with if they're changing the parking within the individual housing units, also going to the form-based, where you can have a business within a house and not have to provide parking for employees or for people, you know, visiting the business. Is there been any consideration to the construction of new sidewalks, transportation? I know that we want to create more walkable areas in our neighborhood for bicycling and things that are going to consider the actual density that comes to the neighborhood.
One of the things is when you do a new project, you're going to have to put in sidewalks. That's pretty much now. So that, in terms of transportation, some of that's going to get done. But the parking is serious. They want to eliminate parking requirements for businesses of 2,500 square feet and less. Right?
You know, we have issues with people that have businesses on the Lar coming and parking on our street.
Sure.
From the beginning to the end of the street, all day long. And
Right.
we can't get any of our construction people in there. We can't get any, there's no sidewalks
Right.
for people to walk safely.
I think giving input about the parking and some real-life conditions is important because, you know, these guys have this idea that we're really not going to drive many cars anymore, and the cars we drive are going to be small. These guys are from California. They don't know that what we drive in Texas, which is mostly pickup trucks. And they really are kind of delusional about that we're not at the place they think that we are, that we're not all walking, we're not all riding our bikes. And so they need to understand, even people, and in your neighborhood, you guys can walk to a lot of things, and you do walk, I'm sure, but you still have cars. We still need cars. So it's not like we're getting rid of the cars. So I think take those concerns, and if you have some real specific examples, like you just said, that's important. Also, I'll mention the residential permit parking. I don't know if y'all have that here, where you can restrict parking on a street. That is going to continue in the code. There are some changes to it, but it is going to continue. We heard that last night. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. You know, Karen was saying these people don't understand what Austin is like, and the fact of the matter is, imagine Austin says, we want to be a city where people can walk everywhere, you don't have to have a car, and all of that. And I'm totally down with that goal. But it's a long-term goal, right? We're going to need all sorts of, you know, rail or whatever to get people really moving. So part of the disconnect is the idea of putting in a code right now that assumes that we've already reached that, as opposed to finding a more graceful way to move toward that. I heard of somebody who's building a building downtown at 12th and San Antonio or something or other, and they're building a parking garage because they know that the people are going to need to bring their cars, but they are constructing, they designed and are constructing the building so that in the future, when nobody needs cars, they can reconfigure, repurpose that, and they'll be able to do it. To me, that's really smart. That's the way to move forward, not to just say, oh, guess what, 30 years from now, nobody's going to need a car, so we won't make room for them.
Hi, my name's John David Carson. I live on Patterson Avenue, which is part of what I guess I'll call greater Clarksville. It's not historic Clarksville, but real estate agents think it's Clarksville anyway. I'll try not to pontificate, but one of the things that we see going on in our neighborhood, I think, is there's a lot of demand to be close to downtown. The land value is very high. There's a lot of houses, and apologies to any of you who have done this, but have taken a historic home and exploded it from 1,000 feet to 3,000 feet. It hasn't added any units, it hasn't added any density, it hasn't added any affordability. Our existing code's not protecting us from that. It seems to me it'd be much better to have, if people are going to continue to have development, to have additional units that come in that could allow for affordability. But my question is really, I guess I have some differences in opinion in some of the things that were said today. Euclidean zoning and minimum parking requirements are the reason we have sprawl in America today. Circle C is what you get from Euclidean zoning. And Clarksville is really kind of a form-based neighborhood as it is now. How do you reconcile, particularly on the parking comments, objectives about walkability, environmental stewardship? Because walkability is not just having a sidewalk. You have to create the right environment to allow for walkability. And in Texas, people say we still drive. Well, if you look since 1994, there's been a double-digit drop in the amount of people that have licenses in Texas in every age demographic under 60. So there are changes, and if we build, I agree, if you can build a parking garage you can refit, that's great, but that's extremely expensive product because now you're building flat instead of multi-tiered stories. So how as Austinites are we supposed to be sustainable and green and promote high minimum parking requirements? It just seems like it's a big disconnect for where we want to go.
Well, my opinion of Austin's parking requirements is that they're minimal already, because we allow the two cars for the one house to be stacked. Most cities would say, no, they're independently accessible. Ours are not. So you can stack 2 cars in your driveway and you've got your parking. And then if you do an ADU, you only need 1 more, except if you're near a core transit corridor, you don't need any. So we're already pushing cars out on the street. So I don't think our parking requirements are excessive at all right now. I think one of the reasons people want to get rid of those parking requirements is that means with a limit of 45% impervious cover, you can build more building. You might be able to build more building because it goes back to your bulk and FAR and all of that stuff. But and as far as being able to build a bigger building with more units, a lot of people feel like they don't want, and the mayor's even said this, if you take out one house and put in one great big house, what did we get? We got a great big house. So there is some thought that if you want to expand a house, you're better off making multiple units. But again, a lot of families really want that space all in the house. So that's a tough one to reconcile. I don't have an answer. Sorry.
I just want to comment on one of the comments, and that was that with Euclidean zoning, what you get is Circle C. The whole city is Euclidean zoning right now, so you don't necessarily get Circle C with Euclidean zoning. And I just want to go back to the growth concept map and the whole plan that we had with our comprehensive plan, and that was to add density in nodes, make sure there's transportation options, work options, employment options, and living options there. And so that's a plan for accommodating more people. And instead, what we have is ignoring the fact that the neighborhood plans suggest that we maintain the interior of the neighborhoods and transition to the corridors. And instead, we've gotten blanket upzoning across the neighborhoods and no activity nodes.
My name is Al Weber. I live in the University Hills neighborhood, which is where 290 East and 183 come together. And I'd like to thank Laura Morrison. When we went through the neighborhood planning process, it took about 6 months, but her office finally got an answer from the city attorneys that the neighborhood contact teams were in fact city commissions, and that if we were sued, the city attorneys would have to defend us. That was an experience.
That's so sad.
I guess my question has to do with, we have several areas within our neighborhood that have deed restrictions, and to me, the legal restrictions within deed restrictions on how you can use your land should take priority over any city zoning. And is there anything in CodeNEXT that addresses that to the extent that the deed restrictions are legal, because some of the older deed restrictions aren't?
The city will not enforce deed restrictions. You would, and your neighbors would have to personally take that to court and fight it at the state level, because the city will not enforce it.
So I've worked on neighborhood plans in part of North Hyde Park and a little area near Hancock Golf Course, and they had deed restrictions only permitting one dwelling unit. And those neighbors wanted those to be enforced. So what we did, and this has been over 10 years ago, we took those small areas and rezoned them SF2, which only allows one dwelling unit, to stop the city from issuing duplex permits, because that was the only way to stop the city from issuing permits in violation of the deed restrictions. And we managed to do that. Today, those are both going to stay on the map because the city doesn't know what to do with them. But I think the city should allow that at times. We have a subdivision that's been pending we passed it at the Planning Commission, because it says if it meets all state and city codes, you have to vote yes. But we know there was a deed restriction on this subdivision preventing it, but the only thing is the neighbors have to go sue the people. That's the only thing that can happen. The city will not get involved in deed restrictions. So it's unfortunate. You can beg for some zoning that might enforce your height or enforce something in your deed restrictions, and I would encourage you to ask for it. But whether the city will do it, I don't know. Another issue we're having is flag lots. Do y'all know what flag lots are? Oh boy. It's where you cut off a little driveway and cut a lot off the back of another lot. This is happening a lot in Allendale, where they have some bigger lots. Maybe it's not happening much here. Some neighborhoods have deed restrictions against those, and we have one pending at the Planning Commission now that has a deed restriction with a 75-foot front setback because of some environmental concerns, and the city's not going to enforce that. They're recommending we let them cut it into 2 lots. We have discretion on that one. So this is a sticky area, and I just think the city should be more accommodating to allow zoning to reflect some of those deed restrictions. But I might be the only voice on that.
You're not the only voice on that. And don't PolitiFact me on this, but if I am remembering properly, in the 1980s, and I'm surprised you don't remember this, Karen, because you remember everything, Sally Shipment got a resolution passed that said, and it was just a resolution, so there was no real legal authority to it, that said the council will not rezone something that is inconsistent with residential deed restrictions. And I had a notebook when I was on council that I always took to all my meetings, and I had a copy of that 1980-something thing in it, and I would pull it out and everybody would ignore me, but it's been thought about for a long time. And it's political will, or not.
My name's Dirk Jordan. I live in Old Enfield. One of the things that seems to be true, that if you have more density, you have more use of infrastructure. Our infrastructure is crumbling now. We have leaks in our pipes every month. Our roads are crumbling. If you add more people and more density, it seems like you have more wear and tear on infrastructure. Is there anything being thought of in CodeNEXT to address those issues?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Actually, well, I'll tell you what I think is happening, and I can't, don't PolitiFact me on this one. This is kind of strange, but my house is in Hyde Park. It's 104 years old, and our water pressure used to be terrible. I have 2 units, and my tenants would always say, oh, we can't get enough for a shower, you know, it doesn't work. Well, last year, my plumber came out to do something and said, wow, you have this really powerful water pressure. I was like, really? It's 100 PSI. You got to put in some equipment to ramp that down. I was like, oh my goodness. So my suspicion is the city's upgrading utilities in anticipation of some of this growth. And they're not telling us, they're not being upfront about it. You know, nobody's saying, wow, we just put in a bigger main, you know. But there really isn't any upfront discussion about this. And so I know we've had to have sewers replaced in Hyde Park, and the city comes in and does utility work, but nobody comes and says, okay, we're anticipating 5,000 more units in your neighborhood, so we're coming in with the water. They're not going to come tell you that. So it's not in CodeNEXT. It lies with the utility companies. And I do know when you do a project or a flag lot, the developer has to provide the utilities. There is no design sense to that. If your power line goes down the alley and somebody chops a corner lot and they need a pole right on the corner and put a big old power box on the front of an old building, they'll do it. Anyway, I've been here too long, guys.
But also there have been calls for doing an analysis about the cost of the increased infrastructure that will be needed with the upzoning. There have been strong calls for an analysis of impact on equity, and that came out of the institutional racism task force calling for that. You know, we got a small thing in place when I was on the council that when a rezoning is applied for, that you have to actually do some projections and work with the school district to see what the impact on the schools of that new development would be. And so, you know, this massive rezoning really needs that kind of consideration. And some people are calling for that, and that's something to add to the list that Mary's talking about of what to do.
My name is Grace. I live in Old Enfield. I've lived in Austin all my life. Really love living here, would love to live here for the rest of my life. I'm not certain I can afford it, so I'm a little bit concerned over the status quo, I guess. If CodeNEXT is not the answer, I'm curious what you guys might say would be. There's a couple things that you mentioned that I'd like to ask questions about specifically. One, you referred to the density bonus program. It's my understanding that that doesn't apply to the T3 transect, which is what this neighborhood would be zoned. Is that what you guys also understand?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The proposal that came out said that you get additional density without requiring affordability, which I think is bad.
Okay.
I mean, you know, T3 may or may not be right in some places, but if you're offering additional entitlements, we need to use that leverage to get affordable housing, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, I have a question for Karen, which you said there are lots of other places to put density. What are those areas?
Well, like you're seeing along North Lamar, Burnett Road, and South Lamar, lots of apartments going up. And one of the things about those areas is the commercial strips up there may be like 300 feet deep. And so when you hear somebody talk about transition, my thought is, sure, you could put a 5-story building up on the corner and some bigger buildings, but when you're transitioning back to single family, that's where you could put some of this missing middle housing, which is 3 to 9 unit buildings, or townhouses, row houses, so you can transition down to the single family, and that might be a really good place to get some more housing. Where we have a really skinny commercial corridor, like we have in Hyde Park, and you probably have those, you have that here on West Lynn. When it abuts single family, you're not going to get a whole lot of development on that corridor. It needs to be zoned fairly low. But on those deep corridors, there's a lot of opportunity for new housing. Austin is a 1- and 2-story city. And so there is still a lot of space. I go around looking for places to build. And there are still places to build and places to replace things like, like Highland Mall's becoming ACC now. But there are places where you could take a big box store and you can get a lot of new development out of that type of a site.
Okay. And then one question.
Wait,
Sorry.
I have something else to add to that. So in, I think it was 2011 or 2012, we had staff do something called a zoning capacity analysis. You can find it online if you're lucky. We asked them, with our current zoning, how many more units can we accommodate in this city? And the current zoning could accommodate plenty of units. And they did it was a conservative estimate. So really, when I was talking to staff then, it was like, oh, so we just have density in the wrong places now. We just need to mold it and get it into the right places so it's more compact and connected and all of that. And they were like, yes, but
I'll go look it up.
But yes, it's very interesting reading.
And then Mary, one question for you is that you mentioned that you've heard people say they want to redevelop our neighborhood. So I'm curious who you heard say that, or maybe where we could find the source of that information. And also, who is they?
I'm sorry. They are the consultants. And this comes directly, and I will give you the source of this. This comes directly from a documents that were under request under the public information request. And it talks about how they would look at our neighborhoods, and it says in that market analysis. Also, Laura and I were in a meeting of neighborhood representatives at, I don't remember when, in Kathy Tovo's office with the consultants, and they being asked, why did you choose our neighborhoods? Said it out loud. We chose your neighborhoods because of your market desirability. That is, because you're ready to be redeveloped. So there is both verbal confirmation of this and confirmation within the documents that the city has.
Okay, so from the consultants themselves, so you didn't hear this from developers, but just from the actual planners who've come in?
Not developers,
Okay.
no, I didn't indicate.
No, that makes sense. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I also wanted to raise one other issue, and that is, I think you might understand that increased density provides affordability. And that has not borne out to be the case in any city in the country. And it certainly hasn't in Austin, where your most dense neighborhoods are likely to be your most unaffordable neighborhoods. And that is exactly what CodeNEXT does. It accelerates that density, and they are not going to be affordable. And the city will admit to that. They started out saying during CodeNEXT, oh, we're going to provide all this missing middle housing, it's going to be affordable, and yada yada, and we're all going to be happy. They don't say that anymore. They say this missing middle housing will provide a variety of housing. They do not say it will provide affordable housing.
I'm Scott Marks. I got here a little late, so I'm sorry if you already covered this. But I mean, I hear a lot of critiques about CodeNEXT, but I don't hear a lot of critiques about our existing zoning. And so I wonder if you could comment on that, because this neighborhood, when I look at the current zoning map and I compare that to the neighborhood plan, it's completely irrational. I mean, the MF3 and the MF4 and the zoning that is already, the current zoning, it seems to me that this neighborhood screams out for modernized zoning that reflects something different from what is the current zoning. So, I mean, can you comment on the problems with the existing zoning and what needs to change from the existing zoning?
So I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but there have been two. How long have you lived in the neighborhood?
Since 2009.
So there have been two efforts, one in the 70s and one in the 2000s, or maybe 80s and 2000s, for zoning rollbacks in the internal part of the city, of the neighborhood, because when they came in and rezoned from the previous zoning, which was like A, B, and C, to SF and MF, they upzoned a lot of things. And the fact was that this neighborhood was very stable, already built out, and the idea was not to be putting multifamily on single family, and people requested that their property be downzoned from MF to SF. And then the same thing came out of, it was one of the recommendations of the neighborhood plan in 1999. And there was another effort, and I need to give a shout out to Linda McNeilage, if anyone knows Linda, who did, basically did both of those things. And so for me, when I look at this neighborhood, and I think it's, in some ways eclectic, we've got apartments here, we've got houses that have been changed into apartments, we've got single family. For me, I want stability to this historic neighborhood. And I don't care what it's called. I just don't want to, I don't know why we need to upzone it. And so I don't know what so I don't have a problem with the current zoning. And the fact is, it's mixed. We do have multifamily in the middle of single family, and why not leave it alone instead of upzone all the single family?
Yeah, and I understand that, but what I'm saying is that CodeNEXT seems like an opportunity to modernize our zoning. And while certainly the current draft has huge problems, and Old West Austin Neighborhood Association has pointed out some of those problems, I think the concept of modernizing zoning is something that could help this neighborhood. And I just am curious, what your thoughts are on that, because when I look at the existing zoning, it's really problematic. And,
yeah,
right.
I've worked on 3 pretty large conservation districts, and the most complicated one was North University, which is just north of the campus. And it's similar to this neighborhood, where you'll have a real mixture of single-family, multifamily, and that was a huge, tedious project, because every site we researched to say, well, is this a legal multifamily? Or, what is this and how should it be zoned? And we made some zoning changes, both up and down, based upon history and legality and those things. The other thing we did in the conservation district that's really useful is to reflect the patterns, the development patterns. Like in the central Austin neighborhoods, paving the whole front yard is not a historic pattern. The historic pattern is usually a 1-lane driveway, or there is a pattern of having front porches. So these are the kind of patterns that we've been able to encompass in the conservation districts, which, yes, that's specialized zoning, but had the consultants taken a cue from that, they could take what we did, which was written by the law department, and it could be improved and a template made, because all of these central city neighborhoods share a lot of the same development patterns. So we could have conservation district zoning. It wouldn't have to be totally different in every neighborhood, but instead of taking the opportunity to use the good work our city has done, they just imported something from somewhere else. And it's really too bad, because it was a great, it would have been a good opportunity. I was on the team that didn't get hired. And so, yeah, I hate to admit that. It was all politics. Had nothing to do with me. But having done a lot of zoning work, that was my vision, was that we would take our cues from all the good work, the Miller Airport zoning, all the good work that the city has done and the citizens have done to a great extent, and try to use that and clean things up. But that's really not what we got. We just got a whole new vocabulary and program.
Hi, my name is Tina Melcher, and I live in Enfield. And I was wondering, how are they addressing transportation in CodeNEXT? Because in Old Enfield, it takes at least double the time for me to get to work, which is UT, on the bus versus a car. I wanted to go to the convention center. I mapped it out. It was going to take me 50 to 55 minutes to get to the convention center. And so I said, I might as well drive. You know, I'm not going to ride a bicycle to work. I'm scared to ride a bicycle, really, in the city. So I hear that they want more people in these neighborhoods, but how are we going to move around and get to other places in the city for economic reasons?
Well, nobody wants to answer you. I think you're really, I've heard we don't really have much of a transportation plan. We have a sidewalk plan, we have a bike plan. The city did that huge mobility bond last year, and they're starting to work on some corridors. That's not, William Cannon won't help you. But as they work on these corridors, what happens is they look at cleaning up the pedestrian way, the bike way, you know, and make all this work, maybe some street trees. And when the city comes and puts money into that infrastructure, they're going to get some development. You know, that needs to be tied together. You're absolutely right. As far as getting across town on a bus, I would refer you to Cap Metro, I guess. I don't know what else to say, you know. Right.
I can't get across town without my car.
That's right.
In an economical way, if economics is their priority.
Right. That's a good point. Write them a letter, please.
Please write them a letter with all your... there are some studies which I found interesting that show that with increased development on corridors, and you can find these, with increased development on corridors, you actually end up pushing out affordable housing. So it's providing transportation is a complicated issue. It has its good sides and its bad sides.
Mary, do we have?
My name's John, and I live in Terrytown. A couple of comments, and then I'll get to my question. Number one is when I looked at all this, I saw basically all the same thing you saw, and I've gone to a number of the meetings. So after the meeting that Councilman Tovo had downtown, I got together with the director of planning, who I understand is the head of all this, and I got him aside, and I said, okay, explain to me how, if you go in and take our single-family homes, divide them up, and people are going to want a whole lot of money for that real estate, and then the developers are going to want a whole lot of money, and we're going to build all this, how is that going to result in improved affordability of housing? His answer was, it doesn't work that way. Okay, so affordability, nah, forget that one. At the transportation meeting that was put on by the CodeNEXT people with their hand-selected people up in front, I asked the question, give me an example of any Sunbelt city where this has actually worked and improved transportation. The answer was followed by Portland. Now, last time I checked, Portland, Oregon wasn't in the Sun Belt or anywhere near it. And they actually would have been a lot better off if they would have chose Amsterdam, which is also not in the Sun Belt, but a much better example of what they're going after. My real question is, if you look at, I think you're exactly right, that what's going to happen is they're pushing construction of a lot of single occupant housing. And that is what we've been drawing in for quite some time now. But that's based on the fact that we've got the millennial group, also known as the shadow boomers, coming through, and that's what we've been attracting down here. But the demographics say that that group is beginning to peter out. There's going to be less and less of those people, and has anybody bothered to factor in this rather substantial demographic change? And after we tear up the city and create all of these single resident homes, what happens then when we don't have all these single residents coming in to occupy them? Thank you.
I think you should write a letter, and maybe I'll write a letter.
Well, you know, also, you might try and track down the memo that our city demographer wrote. I don't know if you got to see that, but he had some issues.
I'll be glad to share that memo with you. I'll give you my email, and it's rsenator70@gmail.com. And it speaks to that.
Yeah, he's a smart guy.
So I have 3 questions from the audience. Please explain why density does not lead to more affordability. Is it because the more you stack and pack, the more valuable the land becomes?
Well, I think that's part of it. And I think the perfect example is if you have a $500,000 house and you tear it down and you build 2 units that you sell for $450,000. So it's less unaffordable, but it's still unaffordable. And so, and the other question is, it's supply side economics. We don't see that working very well. Do you want to comment?
Anybody else have anything to add? Okay. Then another question, and this I guess is really one for me since I'm the organizer of this evening. Why wasn't someone who supports CodeNEXT invited? And I guess it's because, as Laura pointed out early in the evening, nobody supports CodeNEXT. There's nobody that we're aware of who's happy with CodeNEXT as it is.
There are people who support CodeNEXT, and I think they're looking for affordability and density. I think there's been a lot of study that says, as we've said over and over, that what's being proposed may not create affordability and density in the way we want it. But for people who are in favor of it, when you go to the CodeNEXT website and it says citizen input, and then there's some list, but there is a long list of papers from all kinds of different groups. And a lot of those, there are groups, a lot of groups who do support CodeNEXT. There's some who think this is not enough density. There are some, they've said they're not gonna, for instance, change anything in the conservation districts. There are some that want to get their hands on Hyde Park so they can scrape it. I mean, I don't know why, but you've got a lot of different opinions there. And so you really, if you're interested in that, you should go read those different papers because they're the whole smorgasbord of opinion.
And then this is probably a good question to end the evening with. Why can't we just junk this CodeNEXT?
Yes. That's the rally cry.
Well, let me make a comment on that. I think when we get the next draft, we're going to have a much better idea of who's listened and where this is going, and whether we're going to be able to make it work. Another way to look at that is, well, we've spent $6 million, and I think we've spent $6 million of citizen time on it too, and we've probably made some other $6 million mistakes in our history, so, you know, we need to think about that.
The original contract was for $2 million, and then within a year, they had added $700,000 to it, in part to do some things they never did, and it keeps going up. So, you know, the fact of the matter is our code is old, it needs to be cleaned up, and the question is, have we just gotten off on the wrong track? Is there the political will to get this right? Do we have the professional expertise around to get this right? Yeah, trashing it, and the idea of trashing it right now is just not really a viable option, if you ask me.
Yeah, talk to us in October.
Yeah.
Well, I think it is really important that people express themselves, and whether it is about parking or it is about increased density, whatever your complaint is, or whatever you have to say positive about the code, I think it is very important that you voice it so that the city council and the mayor know that you are out here and that you are paying attention, because that is the only way there is going to have any change.
I just want to stress one other thing, and that is the timeline that this is on. Karen mentioned that it's going to the Planning Commission. They have to have their response by January, and then there's the targeted date of April. I don't know if I've heard any reason publicly said as to why April is so important, but it's a huge, huge document. It's terribly complex. You know, I bet there's some pages people haven't even touched, like nobody has touched. So one of the things I think to stress, potentially, is that we take the time to get it right. Because let me just say, fixing it afterward is going to be a mess. Every single mistake or, whatever loophole that got in there is going to be found and exploited, and then we'll come back and fix it. And that's going to be really, really painful. So taking the time to get it right is important.
And I'll echo that. I think our mayor has said that. I think they just don't want to move off of the timeline if we can possibly do it. And so I think we just have to work with it the best we can and keep trying to keep going. But when we see the next draft, I think it's going to tell us a lot about whether we're going to get there or not. So, and the other little tidbit that I probably made up in my own mind is that getting this done by April would be a really good thing for the council members to say we either did it or we didn't do it or something, because they've got to go get reelected right after that. So, anyway. Did I say that?
On the other hand, they have to keep in mind that if they did it and it's not so great, that's going to be a little difficult on the campaign trail. But anyways, on that note.
So this brings us to the end of our evening. I hope you found it informative. And I think probably the main message you should take away from this evening is that if you're concerned about CodeNEXT and how it's going to affect your property, your neighborhood, your city, get involved. Make your feelings known by writing letters, attending hearings, get involved. Thanks so much for coming out tonight.